Morning, everybody, and good afternoon, everybody. In fact, welcome to Brainfood Live on Air. It is episode 223, bringing it to you every Friday, no fail. Even though the head is not feeling too clever this morning, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, folks, where it's actually only 9 o'clock this morning. After a couple of nights on the bevies, it's really quite a challenge to continue this show, I have to say. But anyway, I am here with you today and delighted to be with you. I know we're also doing this kind of 1 hour later than usual. So people who are expecting to see this show an hour earlier, the reason why we kind of pushed back by 1 hour was just to give us a bit of grace, basically, and to make sure that we're at least able to run the show. Anyway, what can I tell you? Really happy to have you on here. There's going to be like mega attrition with regards to the people who we were hoping to bring onto the screen. Maren Hogan was going to join us, of course, as co-host, but she, I know, was out last night, and I don't think she's made it. Anyway, we can continue with just me flying solo. Mara might join us later if she's able to, and we'll get cracking with this show. Anyway, I'm obviously in a new location, so I just want to check whether everyone can hear me okay. Let me know in the comments whether the audio is fine. I believe I am using the right mic, and I'm using the right earphones as well. We should be blasting this out also on LinkedIn. So folks, if you're watching this on my LinkedIn or anybody else's LinkedIn, let me know in the comment threads there. I actually can see myself live there, which is great. And it looks like we can hear everything okay. Okay, fantastic. Right. Let's firstly thank our sponsors, everybody. Thank you very much, Gavin. This is not Sean Connery. This is literally too many drinks last night, and the old cigar smoke, I have to say. Anyway, let's thank our sponsors. We always have to do this every week, because without our sponsors supporting Brainfood Live, we cannot bring this conversation to you. And today's sponsor is, of course, Maren's company. It's Red Branch Media. If you are looking for a partner to help activate your brand in the HR tech space, there probably isn't a better company anywhere that's able to do that other than Red Branch Media. This is a boutique specialist communications agency from people who genuinely know the recruitment and recruitment technology space, because they were in it. So if you do need to have your brand activated, generate more leads, build more brand presence, then Red Branch Media is a business you should check out. redbranch.com, I think, or redbranchmedia.com. Anyway, let's get on with the show. Today, we are actually got a really interesting angle that I wanted to explore, given the fact that actually I'm, of course, in the US right now and in Tennessee. This is a topic we're calling when politics and employer branding collide. And the premise is simply this. EB is great. We need to do that as recruiters, but sometimes wider factors outside of our immediate control might actually impact the quality of our brand and whether we're able to be as attractive to the people we want to recruit than we did before. In specific context, we're talking about the changes in abortion rights in the US, where a legal case occurred earlier this year, which basically relegated the right, the sort of women's abortion rights from the state level, so something that basically every woman federally would have a set of rights for, that has now been shifted down to state governance. So individual states can basically start varying what these rights may be based on their local conditions. What this means, of course, is that women suddenly might find themselves in a position where they're working for an employer and feel as if their rights are being diminished. And if you speak to any woman in the US, it seems that this is a very powerful disincentive. for people to either apply for jobs in certain states or potentially continue working for a company that is physically, where the job's physically located in a place where women no longer feel as if they have the same rights or even feel unsafe. So today we're going to explore that, the impact of politics and these big cultural changes to employer branding. We have some wonderful research that's recently just come out from our first panelist, Pavel Adrian from Indeed. Basically, it's research to have a look at whether these laws or these changes of these laws have actually impacted women's job-seeking behavior. So this would be very interesting for us to go through. And we're also going to bring in, of course, to panel a lot of our friends in the US who feel that they've got commentary to make on that. So that is the topic of the show. If you're interested in this, thanks for joining and watching. Please do spread the word if you think other people might be interested in this topic of conversation. Okay, let's get on with it straight away. I think Pavel is with us, so let me see whether I can bring him onto the show. Give me one sec, Pavel. I will find you in a bit. Okay, by the way, folks, whilst I'm trying to find Pavel, can you have a look at the poll on the right-hand sidebar of your screen and check out the questions there, and give us a vote on what your opinions are in there. That'd be awesome. Okay, Pavel getting invited on, and for the rest of the panelists, we'll bring you on once we've gone through some of this research and had a little bit of a look to see whether there's any evidence that these legal changes have in fact impacted job seeker behavior. Cool. I hear Pavel, I think. There he is.
Hello.
Pavel. Good to see you. And they're definitely new spectacles, aren't they? I've never seen them before. They look great on you.
They are. It's their debut on Brainfood Live today.
Incredible, folks. Don't we give you a treat? Okay, Pavel, for the folks who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. My name is Pavel Adrian, and I am the head of research for Europe and Asia at the Indeed Hiring Lab, which is Indeed's economic research arm. And my team and I do all kinds of research on trends in the labor market globally, short-term, long-term trends. And one of our recent projects was this piece of research about the Dobbs versus Jackson decision in the US about abortion rights. So really looking forward to talking about it. And thanks, Hung, for having me on.
No, very, very pleased to have you on, Pavel. I've just shared Pavel's link on LinkedIn for anyone who wants to connect with Pavel. And of course, I need to give a shout out to the Hiring Labs website. It really has been an excellent resource. All of us who are listening to this should really find a way to keep in touch with this. It's basically Indeed sharing their insights and data from job seeker and employer behavior on their platform. And of course, this is anybody who's interested in these wider sort of environments about how job seekers and recruiters are behaving should pay attention to that. Really fantastic. Okay, Pavel, let's talk about this research. Can you describe for us what the methodology was? Like, how did you collect this, and what the scale of it was in particular?
Sure. So basically what we wanted to study was the labor market impact of the Dobbs versus Jackson decision, which, as you described at the beginning, revoked Roe versus Wade and took the constitutional federal rights to abortion away in the United States and gave that back to individual states. At the time, several states, I think 11, if I remember correctly, had so-called trigger laws. So basically they had laws on the books which said, as soon as this federal right goes away, we're going to ban or severely restrict abortion rights. And many other states didn't have such laws, but had plans to restrict access to abortion as well over time. And what happened is that immediately after this court ruling, several hundred firms, mainly large firms, but really firms of all sizes, announced extra benefits for female employees. And specifically, most of that included paying for abortion-related travel to another state. So if, say, you were living in Texas and you wanted to get an abortion or needed to get an abortion, because it's not really only about elective abortions, it's also about emergency care and other forms of reproductive health care, your companies or its insurance would pay for you to travel to another state for that procedure. Those announcements were very public. They were all over social media. They were on LinkedIn. Companies issued press releases that was captured by national and local press. And what we did is we compared job seeker interest and employees' job satisfaction at those firms that made those announcements to similar firms that did not. And the way we defined similar firms was by looking at what companies job seekers in the US consider to be similar. So for example, if someone clicks on Google jobs in their search, what other companies do they click on that didn't make such announcements? And we consider those to be comparable from a job search perspective. And we found, really interestingly, that companies that made these public announcements of abortion-related benefits saw an increase in clicks of about 8% compared to companies that did not announce. And that's a pretty big impact, because it's the type of increase in job seeker clicks that we would normally see associated with a 12% increase in the wage. So it's pretty substantial. But so I guess what we conclude from that is that there is potentially a boost to recruitment from engaging this way in this controversial political social issue. But we also found that on average, job satisfaction ratings at those companies also dropped by 8%. So we see this kind of boost to job seeker interest, but a reduction in company ratings. And that reduction in company ratings, which we took from Glassdoor, was mainly concentrated in male-dominated jobs. So it seems like the way we interpret this picture is that, okay, companies decided to engage in this issue in a very public way. It helped them attract job seekers, and we find that job seeker attraction boost was most visible actually in democratic-leaning states, so states where people would tend to be more politically aligned with companies giving such a benefit. But at the same time, we see that it seems like male workers basically didn't like this very much, as expressed through the job satisfaction rating. So there's a bit of a trade-off here that companies really need to be aware of. Potentially a boost to recruiting people who think in a similar way as the company and its management, but potentially making some people unhappy. And so I think this opens up a discussion really about how companies should deal with that trade-off.
That is absolutely fascinating. I mean, folks, I think Pavel has shared the link to the research into the chat stream. So please go avail yourself to that research. I think this is just a fascinating phenomena. And as I understand what you've said there, Pavel, basically the companies that conspicuously commented on this issue and responded to this issue to support their female workers, and also to I guess signal to the open market that they were supporting women in general, received a application boost from, we presume, I mean, we can't tell the gender of the people applying, can we? But they received an application boost, but there was a simultaneous reduction of existing employee satisfaction for companies who did this, and that the contribution of that was actually from the male employees. That is absolutely fascinating, and it's hard not to kind of just immediately jump to some probably overly broad generalizations on this, but it's hard to not make those conclusions, isn't it, Pavel? Where you can say, yes, women have responded positively, but men have responded negatively. And what does that mean for companies? I mean, are we heading down the road of having a gendered company based on values? Is that where US culture currently is? What are your thoughts on that, Pavel, if you want to speculate?
Yeah, I mean, these are all great questions. I think the way we interpreted the results, and by the way, I didn't mention, though you see it in the link, that this is joint research with 5 economists from the US, Emily Nix from the University of Southern California, Evan Starr from Maryland, Jason Sokin from IZT, and my colleagues Svenja Goodell and Alison Shrivastava from Indeed. So I should definitely also mention them, because we all worked on this together. But the way we interpreted the results is that there seems to be both a gender divide and a political divide in these results. So yes, along the gender lines, it seems like men, at least some men, responded negatively to this benefit, which obviously only directly benefits some of the women at the firm. Though, of course, some men will also care about this type of benefit because it might affect their female partners. But there's also potentially a political divide. So basically, we saw that the biggest positive response from job seekers really in Democrat-leaning states, which actually weren't that affected by this court ruling, because those tend to be the states where abortion access is much more protected than in the Republican-leaning states. So the way we interpret that is that really this kind of announcement is to a large extent a statement of company culture. It could be a statement saying that the business, protects its female employees regardless of where they are, or perhaps that it's the management of the company has certain beliefs. But just given that very few employees would actually be expected to draw on this benefit, we really interpret it as that broader kind of statement, and that's perhaps why we see this kind of reaction along both political and gender lines.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and it kind of correlates as well with some of the research that we do know that for diversity and equity and inclusion type of sort of training exercises, they often do a kind of a post delivery of the training, some sort of survey for the workers who have gone through it, and there is again a gender divide and often an ethnicity divide also between people who reported it was valuable compared to people who thought it was a waste of time. And again, that splits along some of the lines that we kind of struggled to make conclusions on, but it's impossible not to draw the conclusion that essentially men feel differently to DE&I and white men in particular compared to women and ethnic minorities as well. So
yeah, I think that's a possibility. Yeah, so it could be that men are unhappy because they're unhappy with DEI initiatives in general on average, or it could be that they were unhappy because it was a benefit specifically targeted at women, and the male employees were saying, okay, so women get this potentially valuable benefit, what do I get? Or it could be just that men kind of tend to not agree with these kinds of actions from a political or social perspective. But one other thing which we found in the research, which is really interesting, was when we looked at wages, and we found that advertised salaries at the companies that announced these abortion travel benefits actually went up on average 4% compared to companies that didn't announce these benefits. And we found that surprising, because we thought, okay, so if companies get a boost in terms of job seekers, why would they raise wages? They could actually probably lower wages and still get the candidates they want. But we found that those wage increases were specifically concentrated among those companies that experienced the worst declines in job satisfaction ratings from the current employees. So in a way, it could be that there was a multi-stage process. Companies made announcements. They saw the reaction from the current employees and from job seekers. And when they realized that maybe some of their current workers were not happy, they actually increased pay to compensate. So I think the lesson for companies there is definitely, as you say, Hung, you really need to understand how your current employees are feeling about engagement in any kind of controversial social or political issues. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't make those statements and that you shouldn't engage. Companies and their management do still want to do the right thing. They want to care about their employees. They want to make a statement to the world about company culture, but they just need to think about the impact on different parts of the workforce and see what actions they may want to take. And that could be training. It could be better explanations of their actions and so forth.
This is so fascinating because obviously we have an ethical challenge here, and that's going to be the center of all of, rightly so, the center of any debate on this issue. But we also have our recruiters as well. So you might find yourself in a situation where suddenly you have to make different types of calculations for the needs of your job. So, for instance, does your employer suddenly become less attractive because it's located in a certain geographical space where the legal environment's changed? And have they potentially, damaged, quote unquote, their employer reputation to a particular demographic by their action or for failure to act? So these are things that obviously recruiters need to feed in their expertise when companies make these decisions, but also have mitigation strategies to continue delivering value to back to their business if they want to continue persisting with that company, of course, given potential reputational damage. So yeah, really difficult for us to have a think through. But why don't we go ahead and bring some of our guests onto the show and get their view on it. By the way, folks, we're not going to bring on like legal experts or anything like that. I mean, we know what the laws are. What we want to do, though, is to bring on onto the screen people who are in recruiting, people who are in charge of recruiting, people who may be job candidates, and get their view as to how this has impacted our situation. Oh, by the way, my phone has been blowing up because Maren is now excusing herself by saying, yeah, her internet doesn't work. Of course, the internet doesn't work. And also Susanna saying the same. Guess what? Both of those guys were out on a town last night as well. Anyway, let's bring on Brittany and I think Mary Kay and Erin here as well. So let's roll with those wonderful people. Let me see if I can do this properly. By the way, if you're listening to this, some really interesting comments on the chat thread there, and that's educational for people who, of course, are not a US well versed in US history, which I guess is me and Pavel really. So thank you so much for educating us on some of the wider context as to what these issues are. And by the way, I know a lot of our international viewers might kind of look at this as somewhat of an archaic type of situation. Quite surprised and amazed that this might be happening in the US. But let's not forget that abortion rights are not something that is, easily won or hasn't been easily won. There have been many situations in different societies, different countries, where these rights had to be fought for. So it's not one of these where you can look with a supercilious attitude to the US. Okay, I think so. Go ahead, Pavel. You're about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say I totally agree with that. I myself am not based in the US. There are tons of other issues which could divide the workforce and candidates along similar lines. For instance, in Europe, we have the languages issue of so in gendered languages like French or German or Spanish, that tends to be a controversial issue that also has opinions divided across gender and political lines. Also, there are many countries, for instance, that discriminate against LGBT people, where governments take a stance and businesses often take the opposite stance. So I think this is obviously just a US example, but the issues that it relates to, I think, are relevant all over the world.
That's right. Pavel, unfortunately, I think there was some really bad audio feedback just when you were talking, but I think we got the message, but which is really important. This is just a case of societal change, and every country that sort of makes rulings of this type can be exposed and find themselves in a similar situation where recruiters suddenly have to do something different. Anyway, we've got a weird situation here where I'm not happy to see that there seems to be an overlap. Oh, there she is. Everyone's on. Amazing. Great to see everybody here. Welcome to the show, everybody. Why don't we just do some quick intros? So Erin, you appeared on screen first, so can you quickly, wonderful to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself, who are you, what it is you do, Erin?
Yeah, I'm Erin Matthew. I am a senior talent sourcer at PayPal. And I really should have just bit the bullet and gone to Wreckfest. I maybe could have kept you all in order so that everybody would be on screen right now. At these conferences, I tend to be a bit of a babysitter sometimes for people that are having too many drinks, but next year.
We might have to hire you as like a security or a
Yeah.
chaperone for some of these
Yeah, I've got a
reprobates.
guideline for conferences. It's don't be the story. So
That's absolutely right. Great to see you, Erin. And we have Mary Kay here as well. Mary Kay, great to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are
Sure.
you? What it is you do?
Hello. I'm Mary Kay Baldino. I lead talent acquisition for R1 RCM. We're a tech and outsourcing company in the healthcare space.
Great to see you. I'm just going to share your link to in right here. And Brittany, wonderful to see you. Excuse me. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. So I am the CEO of Curated Corporate. So we advise executives, DEI teams, and recruiting teams on how to mitigate compliance risk and increase inclusive hiring through DEI-driven training. Most recently, I was the Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition, Talent Intelligence, and Diversity for Kraft Heinz.
Great stuff. Welcome to the show, everybody. So let's dive into this. Excuse me. My throat is not is just starting to bail out on me here. So actually, I want to go to you first, Mary Kay, because in fact, it was a dialogue that you and I had that actually stimulated for me at least, the need to have this conversation, which of course was, the location of RecFest. We're doing this in Tennessee, and I believe that Tennessee was one of those states that is a trigger state, so to speak, and that actually caused you to think about whether you'd want to participate even at an event like this, and that again kind of found that quite of a shocking revelation, and it was like, okay, this is obviously something that has affected people in a very significant way. Can you give us a little bit of your own sort of thoughts around this in terms of your career progression, what jobs look like in states that are affected this way, and how does that make you feel when you either travel to these places or look at job opportunities, career opportunities?
Sure. I think I'm on a personal level, in a really privileged position. I'm white, I'm older, I'm past my, prime childbearing years. I'm heterosexual, but I have a lot of people in my life that I love and I care about, and who don't carry that same kind of privilege. And that includes, staff members who report to me, and it includes friends and family. And so when I think about, where I'm putting my business and where I'm putting my own personal energy, I do consider things like, well, where is this event being held? Does this organization profess to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? And are they demonstrating that in multiple ways? I look at things like, are they supporting vendors who don't have the right stance on some of these issues? Are they being inclusive of people with disabilities in terms of how the venue is set up and things like that? And so part of what I am trying to do is be kind of a conscientious consumer of conferences and organizations, and even in terms of where I spend my kind of household dollars. It's small ways of looking at things, but I think it's really important, and it would 100% affect things like what kind of employer I would work for.
That's really, I think I was a very clear description of the position, so I hope everyone kind of understands that. So essentially what you're saying, Mary Kay, is that at every level of decision making you make as a professional, as a person, in personal life or professional life, this will affect whether you want to engage even with some of these, let's say, companies or individuals or whatnot that happen to be located in these spaces and not demonstrating the sort of commitment to the values that you hold most important. That would you say, Mary Kay, that this is a common position? Or do you think this is a fairly rare position as far as those commitments are?
I'm not sure that it's a super common position. I think that many of the people who are in positions of power to make decisions about things like where a conference is going to be held, for example, are people with a lot of privilege who may not be consciously thinking about, am I considering putting this conference, for example, in a location where somebody who is transgender will not feel welcome? Someone who has suffered trauma from gun violence might not feel welcome due to the open carry laws, or permitless carry kinds of things. Or am I jeopardizing the health potentially of, pregnant employees at my company? So, these are the things I think about, but do I think they're really common? I'm not sure that they are.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Mary Kay. Erin, let's go to you on this idea, taking it from a kind of a recruiting perspective. Especially for a company, let's say size scale of PayPal, where you can imagine jobs being distributed everywhere in the US, of course, in different locations, different offices. How did the company kind of handle sort of this legal situation? Did it sort of do anything? And what are your general thoughts as to how companies should behave if they find themselves in a situation where perhaps they'd be called upon to make some sort of stand or some sort of policy change?
Yeah, so there were several press releases where PayPal did express support for women that would need travel expenses in order to receive abortion health care if they were possibly in a state that had trigger laws that effectively banned abortion after as early as 6 weeks in some states. And I think that's great that a lot of companies did that. But really, there's a whole lot more under the surface that needs to be addressed in terms of employers generally in the United States. It's not even just the focus on elective abortions. This widely affects very many wanted pregnancies as well. And let's be honest, in the US, we are still one of the only countries in the developed world that does not have mandated maternity leave if you choose to go through with a pregnancy. And a lot of employers still don't offer paid leave either. When I had my son, a year and a half ago, I had the great privilege of being able to stay home with him for the first 4 months, fully paid by my employer. But knowing what I went through during those 4 months, it absolutely breaks my heart that some women have to choose to go back maybe like 2 weeks after delivery. I would not have been ready. I would not have been okay if I had to do that. But my case is actually more of the exception than it is the norm here. And the problem is when you make a policy like overturning of Roe v. Wade, it makes those situations only that much worse, even for wanted pregnancies. And I just, there's really a whole lot to say about this. And there's a lot more work that employers can be doing to support parents, not even just mothers, but, just having gendered policies like, the mother can take off 4 months maternity leave, but the fathers can take 2 weeks. It really puts the onus on who is responsible for childcare. And I know I'm getting a little bit off track here, but there really is just a lot more involved than just we've decided that we don't want this to affect elective pregnancies. And from another personal standpoint, even though I'm not personally going to have any more children, and I will say we were very much leaning towards one and done, even before all of this happened. But the minute that Roe v. Wade was overturned, that 5% chance went to zero because they say that medically necessary abortions are rare. But if they're so rare, then why do I know 6 women within my immediate circle that have had to have them? Do I really want to put my life at risk to have another? And that's a lot of decisions that get affected by policies like this. So definitely.
Thank you for sharing your input there, Erin. As I understand it, what you were saying was that there has been kind of an inadequate addressal from a company's perspective, with regards to women's needs, particularly mothers and what have you, within the corporate culture in the US, and this overturning of the law has exacerbated all of those things,
Yes.
and kind of made a kind of a raw point even more acute, because it's a pretty tough signal to take, isn't it? Where you have what seems to be a regressive move like this. So, folks, I hope you're getting some value from listening to how this has affected people in the US. Brittany, I go to you on this sort of idea of what the company should be doing in these circumstances. Is there anything that companies can be doing, or do you think that, I mean, obviously there is, but is it the company's responsibility to do it when the state maybe should be doing more? I mean, how would you kind of coach a company that wants to do the right thing but doesn't know where to draw the line?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of being a Black woman in Texas. So you can do with that as you will. I think that a company's responsibility is not necessarily to make life better for its respective employees, but it certainly should not make their experiences in the workplace or their lives worse. And so one of the things that I often say is that there are too many times where conversations are happening at the boardroom level without input from those people who are in the break room. And so I think the first thing that needs to happen is, a lot of people say, you have to hit the ground running. You got to hit the ground doing all of these things. And I had a conversation yesterday with someone who said something that was the most transformative description of leadership that I've ever heard. And that was, leaders need to hit the ground listening. Not running, not trying to make impact, but listening to their employees, really become comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. Listen, SHRM did a study recently that said 60% of employers were confused about what they should do when this ruling came out. Furthermore, or they were concerned about the ruling. And then 40% of those people had no idea what to do. And so I think there needs to be a conversation around, hey, this is new for all of us. We are going to prioritize our employee experience, and not just the time that comes when employee engagement surveys come out, but we're going to be thoughtful about how this impacts you. And when you think about inclusive excellence, I want to highlight what Pavel said about this sentiment around perhaps men are not as satisfied, with companies who made this statement. You have to then address the ideas of reverse racism. If you want to talk about inclusion, you also have to talk about exclusion, right? And so it is endemic to the United States. It is endemic to this world, this culture that creates, when you are addressing issues for one group, there is this perception that another group is being left out. And I think companies need to do a better job of speaking to how a rising tide lifts all ships, right? We rise together. And so I think that is something that really critically needs to happen. I will say, most often, candidates are acutely aware, employees are acutely aware of when there's a canned response from the communications team that came out, or when an executive is having a really heartfelt conversation saying, hey, I am going to lead you, and I may get it wrong, but I'm going to lead you with integrity and honoring our values that are not just displayed on the wall, but that are what we live.
Really, really interesting and inspiring to hear you say those things, Brittany. One of the key sort of insights I'm learning here is that the need to kind of include affected communities within the decision making is probably the first thing that companies need to do.
Yes.
So there needs to almost, like, I'm just imagining now, if you're at sea level, you need to be thinking about, look, if the external environment changes, have a think about who is affected most, and then have a protocol to immediately bring those people into the conversation before any policy rollout or any changes happen. And again, this feels like, okay, it's hard to predict when the next crisis might be, for instance, but in cases of law, actually, there is predictive, because these things don't happen instantly. Those a prolonged debate, as I understood it, for many months, probably even years, before these things get overturned at this level. So companies need to have preparation in advance to be able to immediately kind of get the affected communities involved in the dialogue. But I wonder how many companies actually do that, folks. Let me know in the comments below there. I mean, do you think your company has put into place some sort of, some sort of way to instantly surge the inclusion, if you like? Let's accept that, people are not included at an equal level at every level. But is there a policy in your business to say, right, this thing might be affecting this demographic of people. We need to have an action plan immediately off the deployable to bring those people into play. Let me know if you know whether this thing exists. I probably think I suspect it probably doesn't. Okay, let's open up a conversation to the wider, sort of to everyone in the panel here. What would you say would be a reasonable position for a company, or reasonable steps for a company to take if they were sort of found themselves in a position like this? If we could imagine back, because this ruling occurred, I think, several months or so ago, so I'm sure there's been a lot of backfilling activity of this type. But what would a great response have been had there been some, pre-planning in advance of this ruling being, confirmed? Do you have any thoughts on what that should be? And specifically, this is to Brittany, Erin, and Mary Kay.
I can go first. I think if companies are listening to the people who are really the most impacted by these changes, then they make policy adjustments based on that. And they also have a communication strategy that impacts all employees, right? So if they know that there's going to be, men, for example, who are disappointed and think that the company is going in the wrong direction with this kind of a policy change, then, really listening, as Brittany said, would at least allow those employers to understand where some of the resistance or negative feelings might be coming from and address it. I think the stuff that I see a lot of companies taking, even quietly, maybe not even in a press release kind of way, is adding travel benefits to their medical plans so that employees who have to travel outside of these states in order to get appropriate medical care can do that and not have to, struggle to cover the costs. Allowing time off to go and get appropriate medical care because you have to travel outside of your home state is another simple step that employers can take. And these are not huge, expensive changes because the actual percentage of employees who have to access these kind of benefits is relatively small. One of the things that my company has done is also implement a LGBTQIA resource guide for how to access benefits. And so it's not just addressing the Dobbs decision, but it's also addressing things that impact, for example, our transgender associates who are, seeing a lot of really draconian laws passed that are blocking them from getting appropriate care or getting their children appropriate care in their home states.
I think you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Brittany. Sorry.
I was going to say, Mary, I think you bring up really good points to address the layers of complexity that you're going to see with any ruling. And I think there has to be this analysis. When you think about talent intelligence, and my favorite definition, and I don't know who said it, is the application of science to the art of people management. So how do we historically look at data for historically marginalized communities, whether that's LGBTQ+, whether that's women, whether it's based on race and ethnicity, faith, age, equity? How do we look at those communities who have historically been most marginalized to prepare for things like this? I think where we miss it often is really being reactive. So there's the comms team getting together to make a statement because this ruling has come out. And employees can sense that, right? And so how do we move organizations to being purposely proactive? Number one, you have to look at the data. You have to look at what communities have been historically marginalized overall to address things like this. I say this as someone who was a victim of dating violence and sexual violence, right? And so I think about the implications that would have had on me as a Black woman in Texas, right? So my the multiple layers of my identity would have made it more difficult than someone else who may not have looked like me or who may not have lived in Texas. And I love your call out to there has to not only be a policy that, okay, you can travel across the states and we will help with that, but also think about PTO. One of the things that I encourage my clients to do is you need to have a culture cultivator in residence. So when things like this are happening in the world and they are affecting your employees, you're not just bringing in a therapist off the street. We all know how sensitive that relationship is, but you have someone who's familiar with your culture, who understands your organizational goals, and who can not only help guide you, but can guide employees through difficult times. When this ruling came out, there were so many people who were concerned, whether they were LGBTQ, whether they were Black, whether they were whatever, whether they were brown or from a historically marginalized community, to say, how will this impact me? And when you have someone on staff who is not just deployed in the crisis, but who is helping to cultivate your culture at every step, then you are going to see organizations be more successful and curate workplaces where employees are more invested and they have more faith in their leaders.
Really powerful comments here from Brittany. Again, just as a quick attempt to summarize, we're talking about moving away from this reactive position, which it always looks a little bit distasteful, doesn't it? Because we're very familiar with how that looks when it's really a scrambling effort to have to try and like put a plaster on a problem that you either didn't respect was there, or didn't have the even thought process that might be an issue. So have some preparation and invest sort of in these types of supports. I particularly like the idea of having maybe somebody on staff or someone on hand that might have expertise in psychology, let's say, or counseling, or whatever it might be, to be able to support employees that might have immediately a problem that needs to be supported there. So again, I wonder how many companies have done this. I would imagine very, very few. And again, an opportunity perhaps for us to have to elevate that conversation further forward. Folks, we want to just do a quick pause at this moment. Just keeping an eye on the time. We want to obviously continue this conversation. I think it's obviously important that we continue to do this. However, we do come off air in about 15 minutes or so. So I want to make sure that everyone who is interested, passionate about this topic, or perhaps feel as if they want to get more information or want to provide more support, now is a good time for us to kind of get closer together as community, and you can do that by connecting with people who are paying attention to this conversation. People who've registered on this show are interested in it. You can be sure that the individuals that you might connect with afterwards share that kind of interest. So take a moment, folks, just put your LinkedIn URL in the chat stream on Crowdcast, and just connect with everyone who has done the same. And you can do that on LinkedIn as well. Just do that on the comment thread, and just connect, of course, with all of our panelists, but also with other people who are contributing their links into the chat. Okay, it looks like people are doing this, which is great stuff. Let's talk about okay, let's grasp this nettle. Okay, you have a company that's located in a certain sort of state. Is it reasonable to say they should relocate? Is it reasonable to say you should slowly start moving your jobs into a different place that that aligns with your values? Or do you think that is what are your thoughts on that, or on that, folks? And Pavel, I'll sort of welcome your input on this as an outsider. I'd be interested to get your views as well. So, anyone want to go first on this? Company location. Go ahead, Erin.
Yeah. So the problem with moving everything out of these states where these trigger laws have gone into effect is that there's always going to be those that can't afford to relocate, and then they're left behind with fewer allies near them and fewer resources to actually serve them. The one industry that comes to mind in particular is the healthcare industry. Doctors are fleeing Texas right now because of the laws that they have in place. They've even created vigilante laws where you can turn someone in for attempting to have an abortion or attempting to leave the state to have them. And a lot of doctors are afraid of losing their licenses if they don't perform abortions in accordance with the state's laws, which, limit them to being a time frame that's almost impossible to meet. So we're losing healthcare professionals, and what's left for the people that are left behind. That's the problem with relocating. Is there an ethical issue to that?
Really important point, Erin. I didn't even think about that. But of course, it just goes to show that a lot of ethical situations are complex because we can't quite assess, who is impacted. We can't quite anticipate what that may be, and there may be differential sort of consequences of intention that actually go opposite to what we want. I didn't even think also about the particular case for medical professionals that might suddenly be, having their rules changed, and whether what they were doing before is now okay to do as according to the law. That may change, and that obviously is very, very difficult for people who, have these views and therefore might rightly want to relocate. And what does that do, as you say, Erin, in terms of the health service for the people left behind?
Yeah, and it's not just abortion doctors either. A lot of people might not be aware of this, but Amy Coney Barrett, who is one of the Supreme Court justices, in the past has been part of an anti-choice group that is actually against in vitro fertilization. And they have vocally expressed that they would like to see that be made illegal too, because they believe that disposal of frozen embryos is akin to an abortion. So I'm sure that fertility doctors are also bracing for legislation in that area as well. And some people may say, oh, well, that will never happen. That's extreme. There's a lot of things that have happened in the last year that I never had on my bingo card for 2023. So at this point, it may sound outlandish, but, that's something that I've personally been concerned about. I had to go through IVF myself. If a lot of extreme legislation is suddenly passed, are they going to force me to use the leftover embryos that I have, or charge me for, choosing to dispose of them? I don't know. So this goes far and wide ranging within healthcare beyond just abortion healthcare.
Go ahead, Brittany.
I was going to say, I think it also makes the case, what we saw with Dobbs v. Jackson is the precedent that was set to overturn precedents. And so you open up this can of worms. So I don't think the solution is, sure, you can think about your location planning strategy, right? And where you're going to be future state. But I don't think from a cost effectiveness perspective or from a problem solving perspective, it is we pick up our headquarters and we move. I think it's more about cultivating a culture that says to the employees, hey, we understand that we are in an ever-changing climate, and what we can promise you is that we will be thoughtful, we will be intentional, we will use data to drive decision-making for our most historically marginalized communities to ensure that here, now we can't control what happens when you leave here, but here you are safe, you are valued, and you're in a place who respects the different layers of your identity. And so I think that idea of how do we solve this is something that we have to continue to think about. Because when that happened, and now we've opened up a can of worms that precedent can be overturned, we just have to commit to a culture and commit as a leadership team to say we are going to do our very best effort to ensure our employees are safe at work and that we facilitate well-being for them holistically.
Cool. Go ahead.
I just add that I think all of the calculations around, well, where do you locate your business? Where do you expand? What do you do with regard to some of these things requires a lot of really long range thinking. And to Erin and Brittany's point on overturning precedent, we're long-term thinking. It's very difficult when you're in such an unstable, uncertain time. And that's part of what is making women so frightened. It's part of what is making them so angry, that we're just not sure what's going to be next. What is the next, what are the next rights? Let me take it away. where are we moving backwards on something else?
Yeah, and I think that's actually, I mean, you can sense that sort of persistent ambient animosity, if you like, or sort of threat is probably
Yeah.
an accurate word even. And that's got to be very, very difficult. Think about how that impacts your mental health. Think about how that impacts your job performance, your social relationships, whatever it might be. It's just this overall depressing effect onto
Yeah.
a large percentage of the population.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, one more point. The other thing we haven't discussed today, but is a really important factor to add to all of this, is we are falling off a cliff in terms of childcare availability in this country and childcare affordability. Unfortunately, after the pandemic, we've seen a real crisis in that area, and it's getting really, really severe. I've had people on my team who are returning from maternity leave later than they planned because they literally couldn't find childcare. And so it is a huge crisis, and that crisis is largely dealt with by female employees.
Yeah. And I think that is certainly an international problem as well. Childcare costs, although I think particularly acute actually in the US, but childcare costs are so high that it gets to the point where it doesn't make a sort of commercial sense, if you like, for a lot of women to actually return to work, because the money is actually going to another person, because you've got to pay someone to look after the child. So these are very, very difficult issues, and I'm sorry that we have to have members of our community sort of subjected to them. And I really hope that we can work together to do our best to protect the rights that we have, and re-extend them to where they should be. A quick sort of thing we need to move on to as advice for companies that are in situations. Let's say we imagine a scenario where a company is in one of these trigger states. They are experiencing negative backlash in terms of job seekers are not applying at the same rate to the jobs that they previously had. What are the sort of steps they could take to address to do that recruiting job still? Any thoughts on that issue?
I think it depends on the economic climate at the time, because depending on how badly someone needs a job, there's certain values that they may or may not compromise to work for a certain company. Let's be honest.
That's a really good point, folks. Have a look at the poll on the right-hand side of the chat bar there. I think it deals specifically with this. How does the politics of your state or region impact your decision making when it comes to looking for work, for instance? And I think you're right, Erin. Practicalities obviously have to take the top position. It is a position of privilege to actually say, have an absolutist position, because there's a lot of individuals that actually, they need to feed their families. And when you're in that situation, then of course that's got to be the number one priority. But they're the results of the poll for people to review. Going to Mary Kay and Brittany as kind of final words was here. What should companies be doing if they find themselves in a scenario where, okay, I'm in this conservative state, let's say, that's rolling back these rights. What can they do? The company certainly is against these changes, and they want to support. So let's presume that is their baseline position. What can the recruiter practically do or recommend their company do to address some of these problems?
I think that for companies like mine, where a great deal of our workforce is female, and we are in the healthcare industry, it is having responsive benefit plans that do create access and equity for people. I loved what Brittany said about hitting the ground listening. That you have to stay in dialogue with your associates and make sure that you are incorporating feedback constantly into your needs and your practices, and what are you doing to be responsive. otherwise people aren't going to feel any sense of security in these really kind of tumultuous times.
I would add, so I am a millennial, Gen Y, WHY is what I always say. And I think that we are seeing a trend where employees, potential job candidates, they want to understand and they want to know, and they're going to start asking hard questions. And so I'll answer your question from two lenses. Number one, I'll speak to recruiters. As a former recruiter, I was gathering candidate sentiment. I was doing candidate listening and being very thoughtful about collating the data for various roles, for various geographic locations, job levels, to say, this is what we're hearing in the market, and taking it back to your team leader, back to HR, to say, this is what we're directly getting from candidates, and this is what they're saying about our competitors who are addressing this in XYZ way. So I think that's a really easy thing that recruiters can do. Start collating data, whether or not it's in your remit to do so, and take it back to your senior leaders. The other part that I would say for leaders, and I'll just make a Kraft Heinz reference here, I don't think that you can, I would always say you can't read the label from inside the mac and cheese box. And so to the point about SHRM uncovering that 60% of employers were concerned and 40% said they didn't know what to do to address this, sometimes it mandates bringing in experts who have kind of this higher level thinking and who can build out modalities and process improvements to help you navigate the nuances of cultural change. It just is what it is. And I think many organizations will see the cost benefits and the benefits to attracting, hiring and retaining top talent when they bring in experts who understand data, who understand the changing landscape of the law, and who understand the global perspective to not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but a global workforce.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brittany. And thank you, Erin and Mary Kay, also for your very powerful observations. We have to bring it to a close here. This, of course, is a situation that is ongoing, and it's very important for us not to just box this off and say, right, that's the end of that conversation. Make sure that you keep yourself aware as to what these laws might be, and make sure that you continue to support your workforce, particularly your female workforce, and understand sort of the impact you as a recruiter has when you're representing your organization to the wider marketplace and dealing with the demographics that are so affected. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Mary Kay Baldino, Erin Matthew, Brittany King. Pavel, thank you so much also for your initiative and pulling this research out and making it available for people to review. Again, I'll send that research to people who are watching the show. I highly recommend that other people access this research and also share it around as well, because it's very difficult to it's not difficult. What's the word I'm looking for here? It is very powerful to get objective data like this to support the argument that can sometimes get really emotive. So this is a really useful tool if you're struggling to have a conversation that's not landing for whatever reason the way it needs to land. Okay, that's it, everybody. Thank you to our guests. Hopefully everyone will have a very good weekend. Brittany King, Erin Matthew, Mary Kay Baldino, and Pavel Adrian, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, thank you for joining the show. We'll be back next week. Of course, we are talking about another important issue. We are going to be talking about recruiter fraud, everybody. That's right. Are you thinking that one of your remote colleagues might in fact be double working, overworking, taking more than one salary? This is an urban myth that is actually true. It is happening, and perhaps it's a bigger problem than we might realize. We're going to bring in a load of guests that think they've had this situation, and we're going to learn from them how they spotted it and how they're going to address it. So make sure you follow the channel if you're interested in that and the conversations of this type. Thank you all for watching, and we will be back, normal programming next week. I'll be back in the UK. It's going to be coming out at 2 p.m. British summertime. Thank you all for watching, everybody.